Sukhino wa kemino hondu. Sukhino wa kemino hondu. Sukhino wa kemino hondu. Sabba satta bhavantu sukhitatta. And secure may all beings be. Well and secure may all beings be. Well and secure may all beings be. May all beings be happy at heart. Sit with your back straight. Bring attention to your body. Relax. Be aware of the body as a mass. Not to zoom in on any particular locations. Just the sense that the body is there. And every now and then, check to see if there are any parts that become tight unconsciously. Then try to relax if you can. Open up your awareness to be aware of hearing and seeing as well, and perhaps also smelling. And now look at the mind that is aware of the senses. Not the hearing, not the seeing, not the smelling, not the sensing of sensations in the body, but the mind that is aware of all these things happening. You may go back and forth. Sometimes you're aware of the senses. Sometimes you're aware of the mind. Don't try too hard. Just step back and have an overview. You can continue to do that as you listen to the Dhamma talk. Tonight I'm going to talk more on Sati, mindfulness and awareness. It seems that I didn't make myself quite clear yesterday. I said that awareness is a very general word. It's like a generic term. And to give you a simile, it's like the word human being. The word human being is a generic term that applies to so many races and nationalities. And Sati or mindfulness is just one of those races or nationalities. You could say that, for example, if Sati is Indian, you could say that an Indian is a human being, but you cannot say that all human beings are Indians, can you? So it's the same. Although Sati is a type of awareness, as I said yesterday, awareness of a past object, it doesn't mean that all awareness equals mindfulness. Many years ago, there was a book that became very popular called The Heart of Buddhist Meditation, that was written by a German monk, Bhante Nyanaponika. He had gone to Burma and he had meditated under Mahasi Sayadaw, and he was very impressed and inspired by the method of practice, and he came back and he wrote the book, The Heart of Buddhist Meditation. And in it, he used the word bare awareness to refer to mindfulness, Sati. In recent years, his translation has been scrutinized by modern scholars and practitioners. And generally, more critical scholars say that bare awareness is not really a good translation for Sati or mindfulness. As I said yesterday, awareness and consciousness are almost synonymous in the English language. But in Buddhist terminology, the word consciousness is used in a very specific sense. In Pali, in fact, there are 3 Pali words that are used to refer to the mind. One is called Citta, the other one is called Mano, and the third one is called Vijnana. So out of these 3, Vijnana is popularly translated as consciousness. Mano is translated as the mind, and so is Citta. Citta is also mind, Mano is also mind, although sometimes Mano is translated as the intellect. According to Buddhist doctrine, it has 2 separate and sometimes overlapping systems of classifying human experience or sentient experience. One system is called the 5 aggregates. briefly talked about it yesterday. The first aggregate is form, which is basically the body. And then the other 4 aggregates are mental in nature. Feelings, perception, volitional formations, and finally consciousness. That's vijnana. The second system of classifying sentience or human experience is the 6 senses, which are the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. And each of these 6 senses has a pair of internal and external bases. The internal base of the eye is the sensitive part of the eye that is able to receive light images. The ear base is that sensitive part of the ear that is able to receive auditory vibrations. There are only certain parts of the nose that are sensitive to smell, not the whole nose. It's the same with your tongue, that only taste buds are sensitive to taste and not the whole tongue. Also the body, only certain parts of the body are sensitive to various tactile sensations, except for the bone, your nails and your hair. They don't have the sensitivity. The sensitive part of the body constitutes the body base. So we have gone through the 5 senses. The base for the 5 senses are all material. But the base for the mind is not material. It's mental in nature. It's immaterial. And the sutras don't really say what it is. They just use the word mano. The 6 internal sense bases are the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and mano, the mind or the intellect. But the eye by itself cannot see. The ear by itself cannot hear, because it's only a material base. So what causes seeing to occur or hearing to occur? 3 things come together, then each of these sense perceptions occur. What are they? When the sense space is intact and in working order and sensitive enough, and then there's this sense object, and then there is this sense consciousness arising. So when these 3 happen at that time, the sense perception occurs. So seeing can only occur when there is a sensitive eye base, and there is an obvious object, visual object, and there is eye consciousness. Eye consciousness by itself also cannot see. Seeing occurs when all the 3 are there. One particular element of these 3 not there, then cannot see. All of the 3 must be there. All the causes and conditions must be there before seeing can occur. What is this consciousness? Consciousness is just the bare awareness, bare knowing, bare cognizance of a visual object, color. The ear only hears sound. Ear consciousness is not able to differentiate or analyze whose sound it is, what sort of sound is it, what does it signify. No. Sound is just sound. For example, now I'm speaking to you in English, you understand. There's this sound, right? You don't understand, it's just sound. So actually, we take things for granted. And the process works so fast. You don't even realize it. But actually, the 5 senses can only take in raw data, as I said yesterday. and it goes to the intellect. And the mind is the one that processes the information. Coming back to awareness, each of these 5 senses has its own consciousness, correct? And each sense consciousness can only take a specific object, its own object. The eye consciousness can only see colors. The ear consciousness can only hear sound. Nose consciousness can only smell smells, and so forth. Like I said yesterday, in the 5-6-1 principle, the 5 senses can only take its own specific object in the present moment. This is the bare awareness. The bare awareness of colors, of sounds, of smells, tastes, of body sensations, of mental objects that arise. What is it that recognizes? Even the mind consciousness has bare awareness. It is only barely aware that an object of the mind has come into its field of awareness. Consciousness by itself, whether it's eye consciousness or ear consciousness or any of the 5 sense consciousness, or even mind consciousness, by itself cannot differentiate. It is bare, it's really bare. You just know, just aware, just conscious of it. But if you go back to the 5 aggregate classification of experience, you will see that there's feeling, perception, volitional, formation, and consciousness. Consciousness is number 5. And this is the bare awareness that we're talking about. All the other 3, feeling, perception, and volitional formation, they also have awareness. But they are not bare. The awareness of feeling is that it feels pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. It knows feelings. It's aware of feelings as neutral, or pleasant, or unpleasant. Then sanya. Sanya is perception. Like I said yesterday, it is spontaneous memory. Spontaneous memory can only occur when there is awareness of an object. Then the spontaneous memory will be able to recognize that sound, or that vision, or that smell, or that tactile sensation. If there's no awareness, how can you recognize anything? Awareness is inherent in every mental factor for each of the 4 aggregates. Then volitional formation. Volitional formations are all those mental activity that involve volition, intention, wanting to do something, wanting to say something, to think something. All that can also occur when there is awareness. When there's no awareness, how can it occur? How can you intend to do something when you're not aware of what you want to do? But that's not full awareness. This is just bare awareness. But inside there is these volitional formations, which is a whole range of mental factors that involve volition. Now, we've talked about vijnana, which is consciousness, which I say equals bare awareness. Now we go on to mano. Mano is the intellect. It is the capacity to be able to think and analyze. The 5 sense consciousness cannot do that. Mano can, but part of mano is mano-vijnana, mind consciousness. Mind consciousness by itself also cannot do that. There are other factors within the intellect, like feeling, perception, and volitional formations. These are the ones that do the work. Now these 5 aggregates, or these 4 mental aggregates, actually all happen at the same time, simultaneously, at each of the sense doors. Not only in the mind door. To give you an example, the mind may not be conscious of what the body is doing, but the 4 aggregates in the body are happening simultaneously and in multiple occurrences. When you eat something and it goes into your body, then body consciousness or the sanya or the perception in the body consciousness will be able to recognize, oh, this is a protein, this is amino acid, this is carbohydrate. It will then inform the glands in the body to produce the particular enzyme to digest that food. This requires memory. This requires recognition. If you don't recognize that this is a carbohydrate or this is a protein, how do you know which enzyme to secrete? And it is also very intelligent. He knows how much to secrete. And even more incredible is the immune system. When the bacteria or a germ goes into the body, then the immune system can immediately recognize it. Oh, this guy I know, he came in before. So he knows which antibody to produce. Or at what quantity. All this is intelligent, but the mind knows nothing about it. Your body has got intelligence of its own. That's why when people do this natural Qigong, some people might feel a bit uncomfortable when they meditate and when they're really relaxed, then the body starts to move. Sometimes it's not just a gentle swaying, sometimes it can be very vigorous movement, like as though you're in a trance, and people can get scared. But according to Qigong philosophy, it says that there is this natural Qi in the body. It is intelligent and it knows how to flow in the body. All diseases in the body, all sicknesses and ailments in the body are caused by the blockage of the Qi, the circulation of the Qi. It cannot circulate properly and it gets blocked, therefore you have various ailments. It's the same when your blood circulation gets blocked, your nerves get blocked, then you have a lot of problems. That's why people do chiropractic to straighten your joints so that your nerves and your blood vessels don't get constricted and blocked. According to Qigong philosophy, when the mind is relaxed and the body is relaxed, then this Qi will automatically adjust itself and balance itself. Then it will try to unblock the blockages, and that could result in very vigorous movement in the body, which you will not be able to do it intentionally. Although it is a natural movement that is initiated by the 4 aggregates connected with the body, the mind can also control. The mind can override it. In some meditation teachers do not believe or do not understand how Qi works. It's not part of their culture, especially non-Chinese Buddhist meditators. They will tell you that when you sit in meditation, you must be absolutely still. So you are supposed to press all these natural movements in the body and keep absolutely still. The mind can do that. Sometimes the mind wins. Sometimes by keeping absolutely still and your mind becomes very composed, it can also produce another set of wholesome matter in the body. And somehow it can also cure diseases. So this is another system. Maybe it produces another form of Qi that will facilitate the natural Qi in the body to cure itself. But for my yogis, I always encourage them that if there is a natural movement in the body, allow it to move. And actually it is killing 2 birds with 1 stone without breaking your precept. You are meditating and you are aware, you are allowing all these movements to move, and you are actually healing yourself. But of course, it becomes so vigorous that it disrupts other yogis. Don't do it in public. You can do it in your room. This is just to tell you that the 4 aggregates are not confined only to the mind. They also apply to the other 5 senses. They are happening simultaneously. It's just that the mind is not knowing it. The mind is not conscious of it. Now, talking more about the 5 senses and the mind and mindfulness, there's one sutta called Unnava Brahmana Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. There was one Brahmin who approached the Buddha one day and asked him, He says, Master Gautama, there are these 5 sense faculties. And each of these sense faculties have their own object, their own resort, their own domain. Like I said just now, the eye can only see colors, the ear can only hear sounds, and they cannot hear one another's object. But who is the refuge of these 5 senses? Who is it that is able to take all their objects? Because he was a Brahmin, they believe in the Atman, the soul. They say that the 5 senses actually have an overlord, which is the soul, that is controlling them. So he was expecting the Buddha to explain that it is the Atman that is the refuge of the 5 senses. Of course, the Buddha, he didn't say the soul. He says it's Mano. It's the mind that is the refuge of the 5 senses. It is the mind that is able to take the objects or be conscious of the objects of all the 5 senses. And this makes sense, doesn't it? Because the 5 senses are all pretty selfish. They only mind their own business. The eye can only see, doesn't care what the ear hears, doesn't care what the tongue tastes, doesn't care what the body does, how the body feels. And the body also doesn't care what the eye sees or what the ear hears. It just does its own thing. How can an organism function effectively? It needs a coordinator. And that coordinator is the Mano. Because the Mano can see all of sense objects that each sense object can only perceive individually. Because he can see the whole picture, he can see the overview, then he can make the organism function properly. The Brahmin went on to ask, who then is the refuge for Mano? Now, since Mano, the mind, is a refuge for the 5 senses, then who is the refuge for the mind? And the Buddha answered, Sati, or mindfulness, is the refuge of the mind. Now, this brings us to an interesting point. Even though Mano is the coordinator of the 5 senses, the organism functions effectively. Mano is dependent on memory. If you do not remember past experiences, then how are you going to function effectively? Remembrance is also very important. It is the refuge of the mind. Sati, or mindfulness, is not something that is confined only to Buddhism. It is something very universal. It is something that is essential for all sentient beings. All beings that have got these 6 senses. All beings need Sati, or mindfulness. Why is mindfulness so great nowadays? Why is it such an in vogue all over the world? It's something very universal. It's part and parcel of sentient existence. Yesterday, I talked about the 4 R's of Sati, of mindfulness. The first one is to remember, second is to recollect, third is to remind, and the fourth is to look back, retrospect. Now, any successful person in this world, not necessarily a Buddhist, would have these 4 R's to be able to succeed in life. How are you going to pass your exams if you don't have these 4 R's? How is anybody going to be a CEO if he cannot look back at his thoughts, emotions, and perceptions? You have to look back, and you have to have some degree of awareness to be able to process your thoughts, feelings, and perceptions so that you do not become overwhelmed by them. So what's so great about it? It's something universal. You don't have to be Buddhist to practice the 4 R's. The only difference is that Sati, or mindfulness, in the Buddhist context is used specifically. It is also used generally in the sense of memory, but in the sense of spiritual practice, Sati is of primary importance. Because, first of all, you need to know the teachings. You listen to the Buddha giving teachings, you listen to the teacher giving instructions. If you don't remember, how are you going to practice? Even if you can remember the whole Tipitaka, you can pass all of the examinations, but you don't remind yourself to practice, where are you going to go? Right, you remind yourself to practice, but if you don't look back at what had just happened, also you cannot see the true nature of reality. The primary importance of Sati or mindfulness in Buddhism is that it is used as a tool or a means for liberation, to understand the true nature of reality. How conditioned phenomena, sankata, dhamma, actually arise, persist and pass away. And using that to bring to the mind's attention so that sampajanya, or full awareness, will be able to see clearly and understand. To repeat, mindfulness is a universal quality. Every living being has it. Even a dog has it, because a dog will know when its meal time is. It can remember its meal time. And the cat also knows that when it comes and rub against your ankle or your leg, trying to be good friends with you, is begging for food. And you can get it. All these animals, they also have mindfulness. But their mindfulness is for survival, not to get out of samsara. The importance of mindfulness in Buddhist meditation or Buddhist practice getting to be so popular in the world today is basically the last R. What they say, present moment awareness, which I explained yesterday as really looking back at the immediate past. Yesterday I also talked about sampajanya, which is full awareness. I said awareness is such a generic term, it can be used anywhere. So I purposely used the word full awareness as a translation for sampajanya in order to differentiate that from mindfulness. Usually sampajanya is translated as clear comprehension or clear knowing. Let me now go on to the Four Noble Truths. Actually, I wanted to talk about the Four Noble Truths, but before I came just now, it seems that I was not quite clear about the distinction between awareness and mindfulness. I better explain it again in a clearer way. What is very fundamental to the Buddha's teaching is the Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth is that there is suffering. The second is that there is a cause of suffering. And the third is there can be a cessation of suffering. And the fourth one is that there can be a way leading to the cessation of suffering. What is suffering? The Pali word is dukkha. It has been translated as suffering or as unsatisfactoriness. Maybe the word suffering is a bit too intense, because when you use the word suffering, people automatically associate that with pain, obvious physical pain. The Buddha asked, what is suffering? He talks about mundane suffering first. He says, birth is suffering. Is birth suffering? Yet you all say, happy birthday to you. What's so happy about birth? It's suffering and then you say happy birthday. How much suffering does the mother have to go through in order to give birth? How much suffering does the child have to go through to come out of the womb? What is the first thing the child does when he comes out of the womb? Cry, isn't it? But according to Ajahn Brahm, there's one recorded case where the baby says, oh no, not again. Birth is suffering. That's very obvious if you look at it that way, in terms of physical suffering that the mother and the child has to go through. Then, aging is suffering. Actually, growing is also suffering. From a child growing up to a kid, and then from adolescent to an adult, there's also a whole series of suffering involved, whole process of suffering. When parents get their child, very happy. When the child is born, there's already a lot of suffering. Many, many months of sleepless nights. Correct? Because the child is totally self-centered. He doesn't care. No consideration at all. He is only looking for his own needs. Uncomfortable, he will cry. When he's hungry, he'll cry. When he urinates, he'll cry. He's always crying. And after he goes through that stage, then becomes a cute little boy or girl, then very happy. Listen to everything the parents say. So the parents are very happy. When it comes to adolescence, that's when the parents start to wonder why they have a child in the first place. Especially with a boy, then he will rebel against you and fight against you. And now girls also will go against all your conditioned sense of morality. You have to go through suffering again. But people don't realize that. They keep having more and more children, going through this again and again. Birth is suffering, growing up is suffering, aging of course is suffering. When you start to have grey hair and your teeth start to fall and you start to have wrinkles, a lot of people start to get really very upset. Especially people who are in the West who try to hide this fact. They're always trying to look good, trying to beautify themselves, trying to smoothen their skin, applying lotions and hide their pimples and everything. Trying to appear more beautiful than what they actually are. When aging really comes very obvious, then for many people is a disaster. A lot of people cannot accept it, especially when you're not prepared for it. You're trying to push it away, sweep it under the carpet, cover it up. The actual process of aging is suffering. Then, of course, sickness, don't have to say, very obvious suffering. Death, also suffering. The process of dying is suffering, and death itself, especially when you don't know where you're bound for, is suffering. Especially when you have regrets over the bad things that you did in the past, then you suffer even more. Then the Buddha said, associating with people you don't like, or things that you don't like, is also suffering. And separation from things or people that you like is also suffering. These are all very obvious, right? These are all very conventional, mundane types of suffering everybody understands. Not getting what you want is suffering. Even a child can understand that. You take a child to the shopping mall and the child wants a particular toy. You don't buy the toy for him, he's going to start to cry. That's suffering, not getting what you want. When you suffer in life, mostly because you cannot get what you want. You're disappointed, you're frustrated. Even walking the spiritual path is a form of desire. You want to get something, you want to get peace, you want to have no thoughts, but you cannot get it. And also, because you cannot get it, you suffer. So not getting what you want is suffering, also very obvious. You don't need a Sama Sambuddha to tell you that. But then the Buddha ended by saying that in brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. What are the 5 aggregates that we talked about just now? Remember? Form, your body. Feelings, perception, volitional formation, consciousness. All these are suffering. If you are not a meditator and you don't read the Dhamma, you wonder why is it suffering in the first place? We are all having these 5 aggregates and we are enjoying life. How can you say that it's suffering? This sort of suffering is very subtle. This sort of suffering can only be realized when you practice Sati Sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness on conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena have three characteristics. They arise, they persist and change, and they go away. Now, if you keep on observing them continuously, then you can understand that they are suffering because they keep on changing. There's no way that you can stop them. Arise, persist, pass away. Arise, persist, pass away. Arise, persist, pass away. No end to it. And there's no one to control it because it's all due to causes and conditions. But in order to realize the suffering, you have to be quite continuous in your practice. Because if it is broken up by non-mindfulness, by negligence, by heedlessness, then you get caught up in the pleasures of the senses again. So you don't see the suffering. That's why it's so elusive. Although theoretically it's very simple, but practically it's very difficult to realize. Because you need persistence and you need continuity of practice. If you get a lot of peace and composure in your sitting, you don't think there's suffering, right? Right? It's nice and peaceful. Where is there suffering? That's why early on I already said, if you start off with focused awareness, you get a lot of peace and composure, you can get stuck there. Because once you come out and you see suffering, you want to go back again. Suffering is not something that allures you, but peace and composure, stillness, these are very, very pleasant things you cling on to and get stuck in. So this is suffering. Then the Buddha says there is a cause for suffering. What is the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is craving, desire, attachment, wanting. Very simple. Going straight to the subtleties of looking at suffering of the five aggregates, the rising and passing away of the five aggregates. As lay people, maybe it's good for you to start on a grosser scale. Look at the sufferings in your life. Whenever you feel disappointed, you feel angry, you feel agitated, ask yourself, what are you clinging to? You're clinging to an idea. You're clinging to a desire. You want something very badly, you cannot get it, therefore you are suffering. A lot of people get upset over other people's behavior. Why? Because they are clinging on to an idea of how people should behave. He should have done this. He should have done this. He should have done this. Even though that thing had been done years ago. But still, the mind is clinging on to the idea that he shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done this. Correct? So because you're clinging to the idea, of course you cannot accept. But the fact is that it was done and it's gone. Who is suffering? The person who did it and might have forgotten all about it. But because you are still clinging on to the memory and to the idea, to the expectation, you are suffering. So suffering is not outside there, suffering is inside here. You are causing your own suffering because of your own delusion of clinging on to something. I would like to encourage everyone, lay people as well as monastics, to use these Four Noble Truths, the first and the second Noble Truth, as a very good entrance to the spiritual path. Because we get upset very often, don't we? Especially if you're a perfectionist, you get upset even more often because most people are not perfectionists and you expect people to be. And of course you're going to suffer because they are not going to meet your standards. And also if you have a lot of desires, that is also a cause of suffering. When you keep on contemplating on that, every time you suffer, every time you have disappointment, every time you are angry, every time you're agitated, and you investigate and see why, you can see through your own personal experience that it is due to clinging. Clinging to something, to a desire, an expectation, a belief system, that can also be a cause for suffering. Buddhism is supposed to be a religion of peace, supposed to have peace of mind. The Buddha talked about the 4 Brahma Viharas, practicing loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and acceptance to equanimity. And yet, there are Buddhist monks who are very fanatical about their religion. Yeah, they go around advocating Muslims to be vindicated in some ways, in Burma and in Sri Lanka. This doesn't depend on the religion. It depends on the individual, the defilements. The defilements can cling to anything, to any idea, any belief. When 2 people argue, what are they clinging to? Ideas, isn't it? Opinions. At one time, there was one Brahmin who came to ask another monk. He says, Bhante, we know that lay people, they quarrel and they fight with one another because of desire for pleasures of the senses, desire for property, for kingdom, for wealth, for power, and they fight and quarrel with one another. But there are these recluses, renunciants. Why do they quarrel and fight with one another? They are supposed to have renounced the world. They are not supposed to crave for power or for property or wealth. But why do they quarrel? Then this monk said, very easy, because they cling on to views. Clinging is really the source of suffering. It is the cause of suffering. Not clinging only to desires for pleasures of the senses, but clinging to ideas can even be worse. One can be so fanatical and go and kill in the name of your religion or in the name of your God. Some time ago I read one report in BBC about this place. Is it in India or in Afghanistan or Pakistan? This village of very devout Muslims. One day the Imam was giving a talk to an assembly, preaching to assembly. He asked the assembly if there was anyone here who did not believe the Quran. And then there was one boy there who misheard, who heard that, is there anyone here who believes the Quran? And so he put up his hand, misheard it, and he put up his hand. And then the Imam said, that's blasphemy. And according to their interpretation, he should chop off his hand. But the Imam did not do that, nor did the assembly of Muslims do that. The boy himself went to cut off his own hand because he had faith in his religion, to show that he did something wrong, although it was just a miscommunication. So you can see that faith can also lead to something very extreme. Faith can move mountains. Faith can bring you to extreme good and to extreme evil. Very frightening. Faith and greed are actually very close cousins because both of them grab. Faith grabs at the belief and believe in it. Then greed grasps at something material and sensual and stays on with it. They are basically the same. Depends on what you grasp at. If that thing that you grasp at leads you to wholesome behavior, then it's good. But if it leads to unwholesome behavior, then it's very bad. Then you create suffering for yourself as well as for others. The third noble truth is that there can be a cessation of suffering. And when can suffering cease? When there is no more desire. When desire, craving, attachment, greed has been completely abandoned, then automatically there will be no more suffering. The Buddha was giving you a diagnosis and a prescription. This is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, and there can be an end of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is telling you how to do it. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And this is the Noble Eightfold Path. Part of it involves what we are doing now, Sati Sampajanya, and I will talk about it in another day. At this point, any questions? No. Okay? See you tomorrow morning.